Stay with me, because what you're about to hear started with one moment, one sound, and a silence so heavy it rewrote everything. The room was glowing in gold and crystal, the kind of high-end Manhattan charity gala where champagne cost more than most people's monthly rent, and every smile was rehearsed like a performance. Lily Caldwell stood beneath a chandelier that looked like frozen rain, one hand resting gently on her 7-month pregnant belly, her dress soft ivory against the sea of darker designer gowns, her presence quiet, almost invisible in a room designed for power, not kindness. Across the marble floor, Ethan Caldwell moved effortlessly through clusters of investors and executives, his tailored tuxedo sharp, his confidence sharper, the kind of man who never had to raise his voice because the world leaned in when he spoke. 3 months later, that same man would sit in a courtroom, his hands no longer steady, his voice no longer in control, as every secret he buried surfaced one by one. But in this moment, under the lights, none of that had happened yet. Lily watched him from a distance, the way she had learned to do over the years, observing instead of interrupting, adjusting instead of demanding, because somewhere along the way she had been convinced that peace was something she had to earn. The music shifted, soft piano blending into low conversation, and for a second everything felt almost normal, almost like the version of her life she used to believe in. Then the doors at the far end of the ballroom opened, and the temperature of the room seemed to change without anyone saying a word. She noticed the shift before she understood it, the subtle turning of heads, the pause in laughter, the way attention moved like a current toward the entrance. A woman stepped inside, confident, precise, her presence cutting through the room without effort, dressed in deep red that stood out against the neutral palette of wealth, her heels clicking softly against the marble like a countdown no one could stop. Lily didn't recognize her immediately, but she recognized the way Ethan did. It was small, almost invisible, a fraction of a second where his expression changed, where control slipped just enough to reveal something else underneath, something Lily hadn't seen before. Curiosity turned into something colder as the woman approached, her gaze fixed, her smile controlled, and without asking permission, she stepped into Ethan's space like she already belonged there. No one said anything at first, not out loud, but the silence around them grew heavier, thicker, like the room itself was holding its breath. Lily felt it before she understood it, that subtle fracture in reality, the moment when something irreversible begins, and though she couldn't yet name it, she knew with absolute certainty that whatever happened next would not stay inside this room. Somewhere in the background, a phone lifted, then another, unnoticed, quiet, recording without intention but capturing everything anyway. And Ethan, still standing beneath the lights that had always made him untouchable, had no idea that this moment, this perfectly controlled evening, was already slipping out of his hands, already becoming something else entirely, something that would follow him long after the music stopped and the room went dark. The first time Lily Caldwell met Ethan, he was not standing beneath chandeliers or surrounded by people who measured success in numbers that stretched into the millions. He was standing in a quiet conference room with sleeves rolled up, speaking with a kind of focus that made everything else disappear, and she remembered thinking that confidence like that did not come from money. It came from certainty, the kind that felt safe, the kind that made you believe you were choosing the right future, without even questioning it. And for a long time she believed exactly that. 8 years earlier, before the gala, before the silence, before the moment that would fracture everything, Lily had a career that moved fast, a marketing strategist with a reputation for seeing patterns others missed, earning just over $90,000 a year and building something that was hers, something no one could take, until Ethan entered her life, and everything began to shift in ways that felt small at first, almost invisible, like a slow change in temperature you do not notice until the room feels completely different. He never asked her to give anything up directly, not in words, but in suggestions that sounded reasonable, practical, almost caring, like when he said it might be better if she stepped back from late nights because stress was not good for their future, or when he told her that once they were married, she would not need to prove herself to anyone anymore, because he could provide everything they needed. And at the time it sounded like security, not control, like protection, not limitation. Lily remembered the exact moment she signed her resignation letter, sitting at her desk with the city skyline reflecting in the glass, telling herself it was temporary, just until things settled, just until their life together became stable. But stability has a way of becoming permanent when one person holds all the power and the other learns to adjust. The apartment became a house. The house became something larger, something quieter, filled with expensive details, but empty in ways that were harder to name. And over time, her world narrowed without her noticing. Conversations replaced decisions, routines replaced ambitions, and Ethan's voice became the one that defined what was reasonable, what was necessary, what was expected. When she found out she was pregnant, she thought it would change something, that it would bring back the version of him she used to see, the one who smiled without calculation, the one who listened without distraction, and for a few weeks it seemed like it might. The way he placed his hand over hers, the way he spoke about the future like it was something shared again, but even that softened quickly, replaced by distance, by calls that ran late into the night, by messages he read without responding while sitting just a few feet away. Lily told herself not to question it, not to push, because she had already learned what happened when she disrupted the balance, how quickly warmth could turn into silence, and silence could turn into something colder. Standing in the ballroom now, watching the woman in red close the distance between herself and Ethan, Lily felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in years, not fear, not confusion, but recognition, the quiet realization that the life she had been holding together was not breaking in that moment. It had been unraveling for a long time, and this was simply the first time it was happening where everyone could see it. The woman in red stopped just inches from Ethan, close enough that the space between them felt intentional, calculated, and Lily noticed something that no one else seemed to register at first, not the dress, not the confidence, but the familiarity, the way Ethan did not step back, did not create distance, did not introduce her as a stranger, and in a room where every interaction followed unspoken rules. That silence said more than any words could have. Her name, Lily would later learn, was Vanessa Cole, but in that moment she was simply presence, a disruption wrapped in certainty. Her voice smooth and measured when she finally spoke, low enough that only those closest could hear, yet somehow carrying through the air as if the room itself wanted to listen. Ethan's posture shifted, not dramatically, but enough, the slight tightening of his jaw, the way his hand adjusted the cuff of his sleeve, small tells that Lily had once recognized as stress, as pressure, as something external, but now felt different, more controlled, more deliberate, like a man managing a situation he had anticipated. Someone nearby laughed too loudly, trying to fill the silence, and the orchestra adjusted its tempo, as if reacting to a signal no one acknowledged. But the tension did not dissolve. It spread, subtle but undeniable, moving from one conversation to another like a ripple across still water. Lily took a step forward without realizing it, her heels soft against the marble, her hand instinctively resting on her belly, grounding herself in something real, something undeniable, because everything else suddenly felt uncertain, like a scene she had walked into without a script. Vanessa's eyes flicked toward her then, sharp and assessing, and for a fraction of a second there was recognition, not of identity, but of position, of understanding exactly who Lily was in relation to Ethan, and that understanding carried something else beneath it, something close to dismissal, as if Lily were a detail already accounted for. Ethan finally spoke, his voice calm, practiced, introducing names, creating structure where none had existed seconds before, but the words felt delayed, almost rehearsed, and Lily noticed how carefully he chose them, how he avoided specifics, how he shaped the moment into something acceptable for the audience around them. A glass clinked somewhere to the left, a phone screen lit up to the right, capturing reflections, angles, fragments of a moment that was no longer private, and Lily realized with a strange clarity that whatever this was, it was not happening in isolation, it was unfolding in front of witnesses, in front of a world that would not forget. The music swelled again, but it sounded distant now, like something playing from another room, and Lily felt the quiet shift inside herself, not a reaction, not yet, but an awareness, a line being drawn without her permission. Ethan glanced at her, just once, a look that carried instruction more than concern, a silent expectation that she would remain composed, that she would follow the version of reality he was presenting, And for a moment, habit almost took over, the instinct to smile, to nod, to let the evening continue as if nothing had changed. But something held her still, something stronger than habit, stronger than fear, a realization settling slowly but firmly that this was not a misunderstanding waiting to be explained. This was a truth revealing itself in real time. And somewhere in the background, unnoticed by all three of them, a camera angle shifted slightly, a clearer view, a steadier frame, capturing every expression, every pause, every unspoken word, preserving a moment that would not stay contained within the walls of that ballroom, a moment that was already beginning to move beyond their control. The air did not break all at once. It tightened, inch by inch, like something pulling invisible strings across the room, and Lily felt it in the way conversations around them slowed instead of stopped, the way people pretended not to look while seeing everything, the way silence began to carry meaning. Vanessa tilted her head slightly, her expression composed, almost polite, but there was a precision in her tone when she spoke again, as if each word had already been measured before it was released, and though the volume never rose, the effect did, because attention gathered without permission. Ethan responded quickly this time, too quickly, filling the space before it could widen, offering explanations that sounded complete on the surface, but left something underneath untouched, something unresolved, and Lily noticed how carefully he avoided looking directly at her when he spoke, as if eye contact would confirm something he was not ready to admit in front of an audience. A server passed by with a tray of champagne flutes, the soft clink of glass against glass cutting through the moment, and for a second Lily focused on that sound, grounding herself in something simple, something ordinary, because nothing else felt steady anymore. Her reflection caught briefly in the mirrored column beside her, and she saw herself the way others might, a woman standing slightly apart, hand resting protectively over her stomach, face calm, but eyes searching, and the distance between that image and the life she thought she was living became impossible to ignore. Vanessa shifted her weight, one step closer into Ethan's space, not touching, not crossing a visible line, but close enough that the implication was clear, and still, no one intervened, no one redirected, because in rooms like this, power defined what was acceptable, and Ethan had always been the one setting that definition. Lily waited, not for an explanation, not anymore, but for acknowledgement, something direct, something real, a single sentence that would either hold the structure together or let it fall. But what came instead was something else entirely, a carefully constructed version of reality that required her silence to exist. The music softened again, almost fading into the background, and a subtle shift in lighting cast longer shadows across the floor, stretching the space between them in a way that felt symbolic without trying to be, and Lily realized that the moment had already passed the point where it could be undone quietly. Ethan finally turned toward her, fully this time, his expression controlled, composed, offering a small smile that would have convinced anyone who did not know him, and he said her name like it was reassurance, like it was enough to close the gap that had opened. But there was something missing in the way he said it, something that did not reach his eyes, something that felt more like direction than care. Lily held his gaze, longer than she normally would have, longer than he expected, and in that brief exchange, something shifted again, not in the room, but inside her, a boundary forming where there had never been one before. Around them, phones remained lifted at waist level, angled just enough to capture without drawing attention. Quiet observers documenting what would later be replayed, analyzed, shared, and interpreted far beyond this ballroom. And still, Ethan did not seem to notice. Or perhaps he believed it did not matter, because control had always worked in his favor, because moments like this had always been contained before they could become consequences. But Lily could feel it now, unmistakably, the sense that this was not contained, that something had already moved beyond their reach. And as Vanessa's gaze lingered just a second longer than necessary, as Ethan's voice continued to shape a narrative that no longer fit, Lily understood with a clarity that left no room for doubt. The evening was no longer his to control, and whatever came next would not follow the rules he had spent years perfecting. Lily did not move immediately, and that was the first thing that felt different, because for years she had responded before silence could stretch, before tension could build, before Ethan ever had to repeat himself. But now the pause remained, steady, deliberate, and in that pause something subtle shifted in the balance between them. Ethan's smile held for a fraction too long, the kind of expression meant for an audience rather than a person, and when he spoke again, his tone carried that same quiet authority that had shaped so many decisions in their life. Calm on the surface, firm underneath. Guiding rather than asking, expecting rather than inviting. He suggested they step aside, just for a moment, just somewhere quieter, a simple adjustment, a small redirection. But Lily understood what it really meant. It meant removing the moment from view, containing it, reshaping it before it could take on a life of its own. Vanessa watched without interrupting, her expression unchanged, as if she already knew how this would play out, as if she had seen this pattern before and understood exactly where each step would lead. Around them, the room continued its careful performance of normalcy. Conversations resumed in low tones, glasses lifted, laughter returned in measured bursts. But attention never fully left. It lingered just beneath the surface, aware, waiting. Lily finally spoke, her voice quiet but clear, and the sound of it seemed to anchor the moment in a way that nothing else had. Because she did not follow the direction he had set. She did not move. She did not step away. She simply asked a question, one that did not need to be loud to carry weight, one that did not accuse but did not soften either. Ethan's response came quickly again, shaped with precision, offering context without detail, framing the situation in a way that suggested misunderstanding rather than truth. And for a second, the version he presented almost held, almost worked, because it sounded familiar. It followed the same structure that had guided so many past conversations. But this time, something in Lily resisted it. Something in her recognized the pattern and refused to step back into it. She noticed the way Vanessa's gaze shifted slightly, not toward Ethan, but toward her, measuring, waiting, and in that look there was no uncertainty, no hesitation, only a quiet confidence that suggested this moment had already been decided somewhere else, long before tonight. The music rose again, a gentle swell that filled the space between words, and the lights reflected off the polished floor in long, stretched lines that seemed to pull everything forward, towards something inevitable. Ethan took a small step closer, lowering his voice, not enough to hide the conversation, but enough to create the illusion of privacy. And in that lowered tone, there was something else now, something firmer, a reminder of the control he was used to holding, the control he expected to maintain. He said her name again, softer this time, as if familiarity could restore balance, as if the weight of history between them would guide her back into place. But Lily did not look away, and she did not move, and in that stillness the room seemed to sharpen around them, every sound clearer, every movement more defined, as if the moment itself was being observed from a distance. A glass set down too quickly echoed slightly louder than it should have, a quiet signal that attention had not drifted as far as anyone pretended. And then Lily asked another question, this one even simpler than the first, but impossible to redirect, impossible to reshape, because it did not ask for explanation, it asked for truth. For the first time, Ethan did not answer immediately, and that hesitation, brief as it was, carried more weight than anything he could have said, because in that pause the version of reality he had been constructing began to fracture, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that could not be undone. Somewhere behind them, a phone adjusted its angle again, capturing the silence, capturing the shift, preserving the exact moment when control slipped just enough to be seen, and Lily understood then, with a calm that surprised even her, that whatever happened next would not be something she needed to chase. It was already unfolding on its own. The silence did not collapse, it deepened, stretching between them until it carried its own weight. And in that space Ethan's hesitation became visible in a way he could not control, not because he said something wrong, but because he did not say anything at all. Lily held her position, her hand still resting lightly against her stomach, her posture steady, and for the first time in years she was not reacting to him. She was waiting for him, and that shift, subtle as it seemed, changed everything. Vanessa's expression did not flicker, but there was a slight narrowing of her gaze, not at Ethan, but at Lily, as if recalculating, as if recognizing. that the outcome she expected might not follow the exact path she had anticipated. Somewhere behind them, a chair moved across the marble with a soft scrape, too loud for such a controlled room, a reminder that people were still watching, still listening, even if they pretended not to be. Ethan finally spoke, but the rhythm was off now, the smooth certainty replaced by something more measured, more cautious, as if each word had to pass through a filter before it reached the air, and even then, it did not land the way it once would have. He offered an explanation again, a variation of the same structure, but this time it felt thinner, less complete, like a version that relied on Lily's acceptance rather than its own strength. Lily listened, but she did not nod, did not soften, and when he finished, she did not respond immediately, allowing the silence to return, allowing it to sit between them without rushing to fill it. That silence said more than any interruption could have, because it made space for what was missing to become obvious. Vanessa shifted slightly, her heel turning just enough to angle her body differently, closer to Ethan but still not touching, and that movement alone carried intention, not dramatic, not overt, but unmistakable, like a line drawn just beneath the surface. Ethan noticed it, of course he did, but he did not address it, did not acknowledge it, and that omission spoke as clearly as any admission. Lily's eyes moved briefly, not to Vanessa, but to the reflection in the mirrored column again, catching all three of them in the same frame, the distance, the positioning, the dynamic that could no longer be disguised as coincidence. For a moment, she saw the scene the way someone else might see it later, detached, analyzed, replayed, and the clarity of that perspective settled over her like something final. When she spoke again, her voice remained calm, but there was a difference now, a steadiness that did not seek approval, a tone that did not adjust itself to match his, and the question she asked did not invite explanation, it invited a choice. Ethan's reaction was immediate, but not in words. It showed in the way his shoulders shifted, the way his breath caught just slightly before he spoke, the way his gaze moved between Lily and Vanessa, as if measuring something that could no longer be balanced. The room seemed to tighten again, not with noise, but with attention, and even the music, still playing, felt distant, secondary, like a detail no one was truly hearing. A phone screen glowed brighter for a second, adjusting exposure, capturing clearer detail, a silent witness refining its focus. Ethan answered, but this time it was different, not because of what he said, but because of what he did not deny, and in that absence, in that careful omission, the truth settled into place without needing to be spoken directly. Lily did not react outwardly. She did not raise her voice, did not step back, but something in her expression changed, something small but irreversible, like a door closing quietly behind her. And in that quiet shift, the entire balance of the moment tipped, not dramatically, not all at once, but enough that anyone paying attention could feel it, the exact second where control no longer belonged to him, and the story he had been shaping for years began to move in a direction he could not redirect. The shift did not explode into chaos. It settled into something colder, something quieter, and that was what made it impossible to ignore, because nothing dramatic was needed anymore. The truth had already positioned itself in plain sight. Lily exhaled slowly, not out of relief, but out of recognition, as if her body had finally caught up to what her mind had already accepted, and when she lifted her eyes again, there was no hesitation left in them. Ethan noticed it immediately, that absence of hesitation, because it was new, unfamiliar, and for the first time that evening, something in his expression tightened in a way he could not smooth over with words. He stepped closer again, lowering his voice further, the kind of tone meant to pull a moment back into privacy, to shrink it down until it could be managed, but the room had already expanded around them, a tension woven too tightly to be undone. Lily did not step back, but she did not lean in either. She held her ground in a way that was simple and absolute, and that stillness forced the distance between them to become visible, measurable, undeniable. Vanessa remained exactly where she was, her posture unchanged, but there was a faint shift in her focus now, not watching Ethan, but watching Lily, as if the center of the moment had moved without anyone announcing it. A glass was set down somewhere behind them with careful precision, too careful, the kind of movement that only happens when someone is trying not to make a sound, and that quiet restraint echoed louder than noise. Ethan spoke again, this time with more firmness, attempting to re-establish the structure that had always worked for him. But the words felt heavier now, as if they had to carry more weight than before, as if they were compensating for something slipping beyond his reach. Lily listened, but she no longer followed the rhythm of his voice. She no longer adjusted to match it. And when he finished, she did not respond with explanation or argument. She responded with clarity. Her words were not louder, but they landed with a kind of finality that changed the air around them, because they did not seek agreement. They did not leave space for reinterpretation. They simply acknowledged what was already there. For a brief second, Ethan's composure faltered, not visibly enough for most people to notice, but enough for those closest to feel it, the exact moment where control met resistance and did not immediately win. Vanessa's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, not in surprise, but in recognition, as if she had just recalculated the outcome and found a variable she had not accounted for. The music continued, steady and distant, but it no longer defined the room. The moment had taken its place, shaping everything else around it. A phone tilted slightly upward, capturing a clearer angle, a steadier frame, preserving the exchange without interruption, and in that quiet act, the moment became something larger than the three people standing within it. Ethan's gaze moved again, briefly, toward the surrounding space, as if he had just become aware of how many eyes were still on him, how many versions of this moment were already being recorded from different angles, and that awareness introduced something new into his expression, something sharper, more urgent. He spoke Lily's name again, but this time it did not carry control. It carried pressure, the unspoken expectation that she would correct the course, that she would return things to the version of reality he needed to maintain. But Lily did not move, and she did not soften, and in that refusal, quiet but complete, the entire structure shifted beyond recovery. The reflection in the mirrored column held them all in the same frame once more, but now the balance had changed, the distance had meaning, the positioning told a story that no explanation could rewrite. And as Lily's hand rested steadily against her stomach, grounding her in something real and undeniable, she understood with a calm that settled deep and unmoving. This was no longer a moment she needed to survive. It was a moment she was already stepping out of, and the consequences of it were no longer hers to carry. No one announced the end of the moment, but it ended anyway, not with noise, not with confrontation, but with a decision that did not need permission. Lily shifted her weight slightly, the movement small but deliberate, and for the first time that evening, she turned her body just enough to break the alignment between herself and Ethan, not abruptly, not dramatically, but in a way that made it clear she was no longer standing inside the version of reality he had been maintaining. Ethan noticed immediately, his hand lifting slightly as if to reach for her, not to stop her physically, but to re-establish connection, to hold something in place that was already slipping, and his voice followed, quieter now, edged with urgency that had not been there before. He spoke her name again, but it no longer sounded like control. It sounded like something closer to request, something closer to uncertainty, and that alone was enough to shift the air around them one more time. Lily paused, not because she was reconsidering, but because she understood the weight of what came next, the final moment where silence could either continue or become something else, something that would echo beyond the room. She turned back just slightly, enough to meet his gaze one last time, and when she spoke, her voice did not rise, it did not tremble, it carried a calm that felt almost unfamiliar, as if it belonged to a version of her that had been waiting quietly for years. The words were simple, direct, not shaped for the audience, not softened for him, and in their simplicity, they carried a clarity that no explanation could undo. Ethan's expression changed, not dramatically, but enough, the kind of shift that happens when someone realizes that the structure they relied on is no longer holding, that the outcome they expected is no longer possible. Vanessa remained still, but her focus sharpened, following Lily now, not Ethan, because the center of the moment had fully moved, and everyone in the room could feel it, even if they could not explain why. A few steps away, someone lowered their phone, then lifted it again, adjusting the frame, unwilling to miss what came next, because even without raised voices or sudden movement, the significance of the moment had become undeniable. Lily took a step, then another, her heels soft against the marble, each movement measured, steady, and with each step, the distance between her and Ethan became something real, something visible, something that no longer needed to be explained. The music continued, but it felt distant now, almost irrelevant, as if the room itself had shifted its focus entirely to the quiet unfolding in front of it. Ethan did not follow immediately, and that hesitation, brief but clear, marked the exact point where control no longer dictated action, where uncertainty took its place. He called her name once more, louder this time, not enough to draw a scene, but enough to carry across the space between them, enough for others to hear. And that single detail changed the nature of the moment again, turning something private into something witnessed. Lily did not stop. She did not turn again. She did not acknowledge the call, and in that choice, simple as it seemed, the separation became complete. The reflection in the mirrored column captured it all, the space where she had been, the space she was moving toward, and the space Ethan remained in, unchanged but no longer in control of what came next. Somewhere near the entrance, a door opened quietly, letting in a faint rush of cooler air, and Lily moved toward it without hesitation, her hand still resting against her stomach, grounding her in something that no longer felt fragile. And as she stepped beyond the edge of the room, beyond the reach of the moment that had defined so much of her life, the silence behind her did not break. It lingered, heavy and unresolved, carrying with it the beginning of consequences that had already started to unfold. 3 months later, the silence that followed her departure did not stay in that ballroom. It traveled, reshaped, replayed, and settled into places Ethan could not reach or control. And now he sat beneath a different kind of light, colder, sharper, in a courtroom where nothing was softened and nothing was hidden behind music or glass. The room was quieter than the gala had been, but heavier, filled with the kind of attention that did not pretend to look away, and as Ethan adjusted his cuff out of habit, the movement felt smaller, less certain, like a gesture that no longer carried authority. Across the room, Lily stood with a composure that did not come from performance, but from distance, the kind of distance that had already been created long before this moment arrived, her posture steady, her presence no longer defined by proximity to him. She wore no expression that invited sympathy, no visible anger, no hesitation, only a calm that made everything around her feel more precise, more real, and in that calm there was something unmistakable, something that did not need explanation. A screen flickered to life, not dramatically, not announced, just a quiet shift in focus as attention moved toward it, and Ethan's gaze followed almost instinctively, as if part of him already knew what was about to unfold. The footage began without introduction, a familiar room, familiar lighting, a reflection he recognized before the context fully settled, and for a moment, the past and present overlapped in a way that made it impossible to separate them. The ballroom appeared again, not as memory, but as record, every movement captured, every pause preserved, every silence made visible in a way that words had never fully conveyed. The angle was steady, clearer than he expected, showing details he had not noticed at the time, the positioning, the expressions, the exact moment where his certainty had faltered, and as the recording continued, the room seemed to tighten around him, not with noise, but with understanding. No one spoke while it played, no one interrupted, because there was nothing to add, nothing to reshape. The moment existed exactly as it had happened, and for the first time, it did not belong to him. Lily did not look at the screen. She did not need to. Her focus remained forward, steady, as if the past no longer required her attention, as if what had already been seen did not need to be relived. Ethan shifted slightly in his seat, a small movement, but noticeable now, because every movement was noticeable here, every reaction carried weight, and in that shift there was something new, something that had not been present before, something closer to realization than resistance. The footage ended without sound, the screen dimming back into stillness, and for a brief second, the room held its breath, not waiting for explanation, not expecting argument, but recognizing the finality of what had just been shown. Lily stepped forward then, not toward him, but toward the space that defined the outcome, and her presence there did not demand attention. It held it naturally, because it was no longer tied to anything that needed to be proven. Ethan looked at her, really looked this time, without distance, without assumption, and in that moment, there was nothing left to control, nothing left to adjust, only the quiet understanding of what had already been lost. The room remained silent, not out of tension, but out of completion, because everything that needed to be seen had already been seen, and everything that needed to change had already begun to change. And as Lily stood there, composed and unshaken, the space between them no longer felt like absence. It felt like resolution, the kind that does not announce itself, the kind that simply exists, undeniable and final, leaving behind a truth that did not need to be spoken out loud for anyone to understand.